When I found out my husband was still married, I wasn't angry first. I was silent. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than any scream. That evening, the room was full of noise. Our baby crying, the TV murmuring in the background, a kettle whistling in the kitchen, and yet, inside me, there was only stillness. Like something had frozen in my chest. The papers were right there, on the table. Legal documents, black ink on crisp white pages that smelled faintly of dust and betrayal. His name, her name, and the word spouse. My eyes kept returning to that word as if it were burning through the paper. I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was standing, the next I was staring at those words from the edge of our dining chair. My hands trembled, but not from shock, from clarity. Because somewhere deep down, I think I always knew, he had been distant lately. Not cruel, not cold, just absent. His laughter didn't reach his eyes anymore. When I'd ask about his past, he'd touch my hand and say, "That's behind me, love. Let's not drag old ghosts into our new life." But ghosts have a way of finding their own doorways. That evening, he walked in like any other day, his tie loosened, his phone still in his hand. He kissed the top of my head, mumbled something about traffic, and then looked at the table. I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of panic when he saw the papers. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was a mirror, and in it, he saw his own truth. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't guilty. It was fearful, the kind of fear that comes when a secret finally runs out of places to hide. I looked up at him, the man I had built a home with, the man who had held my hand through my pregnancy, the man who had sworn to me, sworn that his past was finished. "Where?" he asked again, louder this time. I blinked slowly. "The drawer," I said. "The one you told me not to clean." He sighed and rubbed his face like a tired actor caught off script. "It's not what you think. That line, it's funny how universal it is. Every liar, every cheater, every betrayer says it the same way, as if denial could bend reality." I picked up the paper and handed it to him. "It says you're still married to her, Daniel." He didn't deny it. He just stared at the document, then at me, and I saw something in his face collapse. Not regret, not guilt, just calculation. I waited for the truth, for an explanation, for anything that might stitch my world back together. But instead, he said, "You have to understand, it's complicated." I laughed, a sharp sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Complicated?" I whispered. "You married me while you were still married to someone else. You let me carry your child. You made me your secret." The baby's cry pierced through the silence like a knife. He turned toward the sound, instinctively. The father in him responding before the husband or the liar could react. And in that moment, I felt the cruelest truth of all. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who wanted everything and thought he could keep it. When he reached for me, I stepped back. "Don't," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Just don't." He nodded slowly, as if realizing something irreversible had just happened. Outside, the evening had turned heavy with rain. The window blurred with droplets, the air smelled of wet soil and electric tension. I stood there, my arms wrapped around myself, while the man I loved stared at the pieces of a life he had built on a lie. And for the first time since we'd met, there was nothing left to say. He didn't sleep in our bed that night. I didn't ask him to leave. I didn't have to. He knew. After I put our baby to sleep, I walked into the living room and found him sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, his phone in his hand. The light from the screen painted his face pale and guilty. He didn't look up when I entered. There was no yelling, no tears, no grand confrontation like in the movies. Just a quiet war between us, invisible but loud enough to rattle the air. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. Somewhere a dog barked. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Messy hair, tired eyes, a woman holding the wreckage of her own heart. "Was any of it real, Daniel?" I asked. He looked up slowly. Of course it was. The way he said it, steady, calm, made me hate him even more. Because love spoken through lies is still poison. I sat across from him, the edge of my nightgown brushing against my ankle. "Then tell me why you lied." He stared at me for a long time, then exhaled, the kind of sigh that sounds like surrender. "I was going to end it," he said. I swear I was. But then we met, and everything moved so fast. "You were light, you know. You made me feel like I could breathe again." I almost laughed. That's what he said the night he proposed, that I made him feel alive. I used to think it was romantic. Now it sounded like a confession. "So, you never divorced her?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "No, but it was over between us. We hadn't lived together in years." I shook my head slowly. "But legally, she was still your wife." He looked away, his silence a small, pitiful admission. I wanted to cry, but my tears felt too valuable to waste on him. My heart didn't break loudly. It just folded in on itself. What was I then? I asked. A distraction? A secret? The woman you could love because your real life was too messy? He looked at me with those same pleading eyes that once convinced me he was different. "No, you're my family." The word family hit me like a cruel echo. Our baby stirred in the other room, and the sound twisted inside me. That child was innocent, born from love that was never real, but somehow still sacred. I got up and walked to the window, watching rain streak down the glass. Every drop looked like a thought I didn't want to face. He stood behind me, his voice softer now. "I'll fix it. I'll talk to her. I'll make it right." I turned around. "Make what right, Daniel? You committed bigamy. You lied to me, to her, to everyone. There's no fixing that, only truth left to face." He stepped closer. "Please don't destroy us." "Us?" I repeated, almost whispering. "You destroyed us the moment you said 'I do' to two different women." There was a flash of something in his eyes, fear, maybe shame, before he turned away. He picked up his phone, probably to call someone, but then stopped and put it down again. We stood there, two strangers in the same house, bound by a child and broken promises. I don't know how long we stayed like that, silent, breathing the same air that now felt too thick to inhale. At some point, I whispered, "You should go." He looked at me, as if searching for mercy in a face that no longer had any left to give. "Where would I go?" he asked. "Back," I said. "To the life you never ended." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like a man walking toward his own reckoning. He picked up his coat, slipped on his shoes, and left without another word. The door clicked shut, and the sound felt final, like a chapter closing itself. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, holding onto the back of a chair just to keep myself upright. The rain outside had stopped, but the air still smelled like thunder. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat by the crib, watching my baby breathe, wondering how I would tell this tiny soul that the man who gave them their name was never really mine, and that was the beginning, not of heartbreak, but of awakening. Because that night I learned that silence has a voice, and mine was finally ready to speak. Before the truth burned everything down, life was ordinary, almost beautifully so. I used to wake up to the sound of Daniel's voice humming in the kitchen. He couldn't sing to save his life, but he always tried, usually some old song from the radio. The smell of coffee would fill the air, rich and bitter, mixing with the faint sweetness of baby lotion from our son's room. It was domestic peace, the kind you take for granted when you still believe your world is solid. We lived in a small house on the edge of town, pale blue walls, white curtains, and a front yard. Daniel swore he'd turn into a garden one day. He never did, of course. The flower beds were still bare when he left, but back then I didn't mind. I used to tell myself love was enough to fill the spaces where effort didn't reach. Daniel was charming, that easy, practiced kind of charm that made people feel seen. When we met, he told me he was recently divorced. I remember the word divorced didn't bother me at all. I was 31, old enough to know that life rarely comes in clean chapters. We met at a friend's barbecue. He was standing near the grill, laughing with a group of people, holding a glass of lemonade. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not a bold, intrusive smile, but one that felt like recognition. Later that evening, he asked if I wanted to help him fetch more ice from the kitchen. And somehow, between the fridge and the back porch, a conversation started that lasted all night. He told me he worked in construction management, that he'd been through a rough few years, that he wanted to start over. His honesty, or what I thought was honesty, drew me in. I had been alone for a long time before Daniel. My last relationship ended quietly, a mutual understanding that two people can love each other but still walk in different directions. I wasn't looking for anything serious. But Daniel had a way of making things feel safe. He started showing up everywhere, bringing lunch to my office, fixing small things around my apartment, folding laundry while making jokes about how I had too many useless towels. I used to laugh when he said that. He'd wink and say, "It's okay, I'll marry you and your towels." And he did, or so I thought. Our wedding was small. Just a handful of friends, a few family members, a borrowed dress that my sister insisted was lucky. I remember looking into his eyes as we said our vows. He cried real tears. I wiped them with my thumb and thought, this man means every word. After we married, we moved into the little blue house. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Daniel worked long hours, sometimes coming home late, smelling of concrete dust and cologne. He always kissed me before he washed up, always said, "You're my piece, you know that?" And I believed him. When our son, Noah, was born, Daniel was there in the delivery room, holding my hand so tight I thought he'd never let go. He cried again, big, trembling tears that landed on Noah's tiny blanket. I'll never forget the way he looked at him, like he'd been given a second chance at life. For a while we were happy, the kind of quiet happiness that comes from shared routines, Sunday pancakes, movie nights, the squeak of Noah's baby swing in the corner. Daniel would hum that same off-key tune while feeding him, and I'd tease him about scaring the baby with his musical talents. Sometimes, though, he'd go quiet. I'd find him sitting alone on the porch, staring at the sky. When I'd ask what was wrong, he'd smile and say, "Just thinking about how lucky I am." I didn't question it. I never thought to. If I'm honest, there were small things I ignored. A phone call he'd take in another room, a letter he'd tear up before I could see it, a business trip that didn't quite line up with his schedule. But every time doubt flickered, he had a way of smothering it with affection. He'd bring me flowers, or cook dinner, or hold me in bed and whisper, "I'll never let anything hurt you." And so I let my instincts go quiet. Because when you love someone, you don't count their shadows. You just bask in their light and hope it lasts. If I had known then what those silences meant, maybe I would have asked harder questions. Maybe I wouldn't have built my life on someone else's unfinished story. But love, real or not, makes you see what you want to see. And for a long time, I saw only him. There's something sacred about routine, the way small habits turn into anchors without you realizing it. Back then, my life with Daniel was stitched together by those little anchors. Morning coffee, his jacket on the chair, the soft click of the front door when he came home. He wasn't perfect. He could be forgetful, sometimes careless with words. But he had this warmth that made forgiveness feel easy. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. When he laughed, it filled the house. He had a way of making every ordinary moment feel like a promise. Our mornings were my favorite. Noah would wake early, 6 a.m. sharp, his tiny giggles echoing through the baby monitor. I'd groan, Daniel would laugh, and somehow he'd always be the one to get up first. I'd watch from the doorway as he lifted Noah from the crib, whispering things like, "You're the reason your mom loves me, you know that?" Sometimes I'd think, this is what happiness looks like. Not fireworks, not grand gestures, just this quiet warmth, a baby's laugh, a husband's tired grin. We'd have breakfast together most days. Daniel liked toast almost burnt and coffee too sweet. I used to tease him that he liked sugar with a hint of coffee, not the other way around. He'd wink and say, "That's why I married you. You balance me out." I used to believe that line meant something, that I really did balance him, calm to his chaos, softness to his storms. But sometimes, when I'd catch him staring out the window, lost in thought, I'd wonder if he was remembering a life before me. There was always this faint distance behind his eyes, like a door he kept half closed. Once, I asked him directly, "Do you ever think about her?" He didn't flinch. "Not anymore," he said. "She's just someone I used to know." He kissed my forehead, and I let that be enough, because who wants to pull at threads when the fabric feels whole? My sister Amira wasn't as easily convinced. She'd come over often, bringing food and unsolicited opinions. "You don't know much about his ex," she said once, as we folded laundry together. I rolled my eyes. "That's because she's his past, not mine," she frowned. Still, Rashida, men who avoid talking about their past usually have something to hide. I laughed it off. "Not Daniel. He's just private." She gave me a look that said, "You'll see." I brushed it away like lint from a sleeve. I didn't want her skepticism touching what I thought was my peace. Sometimes I'd tell her how lucky I felt. She'd smile politely, but there was always that pause, the kind that says, "I hope you're right." Daniel was good with my family, though. He charmed my mother with polite manners, helped my father fix the porch light, played chess with my brother. Everyone loved him. He was the man who showed up with gifts, remembered birthdays, and called my mother Mom without hesitation. So when he said he was divorced, when he said I was his new beginning, no one questioned it. He wore sincerity like a well-tailored suit, and I wore belief. Even the way he handled his phone never seemed suspicious. He had 2 phones, one for work, he said, and one personal. I never went through them. I never needed to. Trust to me wasn't about surveillance. It was about faith. But sometimes faith blinds more than it comforts. One night, after putting Noah to sleep, I came into the living room and found Daniel staring at a photograph. It was an old one, a woman and a little girl. I recognized the face immediately. He had shown it to me early in our relationship. His ex-wife and niece, he'd said, but this time he slipped the photo into his wallet too quickly. I remember asking, "Do you miss her?" He smiled faintly, then shook his head. "No, I just hate how things ended." That was the first time I ever heard regret in his voice when he talked about her. I thought it was sadness. It was guilt. I just didn't know it yet. Life carried on. Months passed. Noah turned 1. We hosted a small birthday party. Balloons, homemade cake, laughter. Daniel's smile that day was bright and easy. No one would have guessed there were fractures beneath it. But sometimes, at night, when the house was quiet, I'd wake and find his side of the bed empty. I'd hear his voice low and hushed from the porch. When I'd ask who he was talking to, he'd smile and say, "Just work stuff. Go back to sleep." And I would. Because love, I've learned, can be the gentlest kind of blindness. Looking back, the clues were everywhere. Small, soft betrayals wrapped in affection. The late calls, the secret drawer, the stories that didn't quite align, but I told myself, every lie was just my imagination, until the day imagination turned into proof. Didn't know when the shift happened, when the air inside the house Stopped feeling familiar and started feeling watched. Maybe it was always there, and I just never noticed. Or maybe something inside those walls had finally decided to stop hiding. It began small, the kind of small you could dismiss if you wanted to. Keys misplaced. The porch light flickering for no reason. A chair angled slightly different than I remembered. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a mind playing tricks on itself. But there's a difference between forgetting something and feeling something, and I felt it. That thick, invisible tension, like the house itself was holding its breath. The first real clue came on a quiet Thursday morning. I woke up earlier than usual, the kind of early where the sun hasn't fully committed to the sky yet. The light outside was cold, thin, and blue. I went to the kitchen for some water, half asleep, still wearing that dazed, heavy stillness that clings after bad dreams. That's when I noticed it, the back door. It was unlocked. Now, that wouldn't have meant much to anyone else. But I was meticulous about locking it. I had been ever since the day I moved in. I could have sworn I turned that deadbolt before going to bed. And yet, there it was, wide open. The metal latch resting against the frame, useless. The strange thing was, nothing was stolen. No drawers opened, no muddy footprints, no sign of forced entry. Just the quiet, deliberate undoing of something I had done the night before. It's funny how the smallest details can pull your entire sense of safety apart. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that door, waiting for some sound, some logical explanation to fill the silence. But the house just hummed faintly, the refrigerator cycling on, the wind brushing against the siding. My first instinct was to blame myself. Maybe I'd been distracted. Maybe I'd thought I'd locked it but hadn't. That's what I told myself. It's what anyone would tell themselves. But the longer I stood there, the less sense that made. Because I remembered the feeling of turning that lock, the weight of the bolt sliding into place, the solid click beneath my thumb. And yet, here I was. I locked it again, twice this time. Then I stood there, listening to the sound of the lock, as if the noise could convince me it would stay that way. I didn't mention it to anyone that day. I wasn't ready to sound crazy over something so small. But that night, when I went to bed, I pushed a chair under the handle. Just in case, I laughed at myself for doing it. But that laughter felt hollow, because the truth is, I didn't trust my own home anymore. 2 days later, something else happened. Something even harder to explain. I was sitting in the living room, reading through some old letters I'd found in a wooden box that came with the house. The letters were dated 1947, addressed to someone named Eliza. They were delicate, folded so many times they'd practically memorized the creases. The words were faded, written in a looping, elegant hand. I could only make out fragments, mentions of the orchard behind the house, of voices by the well, and a line that chilled me for reasons I couldn't explain. It watches through the window at night. I remember running my finger along that line again and again. The ink had bled just slightly into the paper, like the words themselves didn't want to stay contained. I don't know what made me look up. Maybe instinct. Maybe that quiet, ancient alarm that rings inside the human body when something unseen shifts nearby. Across the room, on the far wall near the window, something caught my eye. A mark. Thin, black, and deliberate, like a symbol scratched into the paint. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. It looked like an eye drawn in a single continuous stroke, imperfect, but intentional. I walked closer, heart pounding, my breath catching in my throat. The closer I got, the clearer it became. The lines weren't drawn in ink or marker. They were burned, slightly charred into the wall itself, as if someone or something had branded it there. The air around that wall felt colder, denser, like walking into a memory you didn't want to relive. I touched the mark with my fingertip, and felt a faint sting of heat, even though the surface was smooth and dry. And then, somewhere above me, the sound. A slow, heavy creak. It came from the attic. Now here's the thing. I hadn't been in the attic since I moved in. Not because I was scared, but because there was no reason to. It was just old beams, dust, and insulation. Or so I thought. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The beam was weak, sputtering in and out, but it was enough. I climbed the narrow stairs, each step protesting under my weight. By the time I reached the top, the air was thick with dust. The kind that clings to your eyelashes and makes every breath taste like paper. The space was empty, at least at first glance. Old furniture draped in yellowed sheets, a few cracked picture frames. Nothing that screamed danger. But then I noticed the floorboards near the center, cleaner than the rest, as if someone had been walking there recently. I followed the faint footprints to the far end of the attic, where the wall slanted down. And there, in the shadow of a wooden beam, something shimmered. It was another mark, the same symbol, the same single-line eye, drawn in the dust, right above a small, rectangular panel in the floor, a hidden compartment. I crouched down, my heart racing. The wood creaked softly as I pressed against the edges, finding a loose board. It lifted easily, revealing a shallow space beneath. Inside, wrapped in a brittle piece of cloth, was something small and round, a locket. I wiped off the dust. It was silver, tarnished with age, engraved with the same eye symbol I'd just seen on the wall. When I opened it, I found two things inside. A faded photograph of a woman in a long dress, standing in front of the house I was living in. Her expression was hard to read, neither smiling nor sad, just watching. And on the other side, a lock of dark hair. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. Maybe minutes, maybe more. But the moment I closed the locket, something in the attic changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in pressure, like the air had tightened around me. Then came the sound, that same slow, deliberate creak. But this time, it wasn't above me, it was behind me. I turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement in the far corner, a shape pulling back into shadow. But when I stepped closer, it was gone. The beam of the flashlight caught on the old mirror leaning against the wall. Its surface was coated in grime, but through the haze, I saw my reflection, pale, wide-eyed, and breathing hard. And then, for half a second, it wasn't just me in the reflection. There was someone standing just behind my shoulder, a woman. I froze. The light trembled in my hand, catching dust in the air like drifting snow. And there, just for a heartbeat, she was behind me. A woman, still, silent, watching. Her outline was faint, like smoke curling inside glass. I couldn't see her face clearly, only the suggestion of it. Hair pulled back, a long dress, the kind stitched from another century, and then she was gone. Vanished as if she'd only ever existed in the space between blinks. I stood there, breathing hard, the beam of the flashlight shaking across the rafters. My own reflection stared back at me, trembling, pale, terrified. The attic was empty again. Completely empty, but I knew what I saw. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the locket on the wood before me, the mark on the wall burned into my thoughts. When the first light seeped through the curtains, I finally dared to open the photograph again. The woman's eyes, their shape, their stillness, looked exactly like the faint outline I'd seen in the mirror. And for the first time, a question began to take root in me. A quiet, dangerous question. What if she never left this house? The next morning I went digging, not out of bravery, but because the not knowing was worse than the fear. I went down to the basement, where the air always felt heavier. The walls there were rough stone, sweating moisture even in summer. I took the old boxes off the shelves, records, newspapers, scraps of the lives that came before mine, and buried beneath the stack of yellowed documents, I found something strange. A deed. Old, so old the ink had bled through the paper. The house had changed hands many times. Families came and went, but the same name appeared again and again. Written in faded cursive at the edge of every sale, Eliza Rowan, the woman from the photograph. The date beside her name, 1947. Something about that year felt familiar. I went upstairs, pulled the letters from the wooden box again, and checked the dates. All 1947. All signed with her initials, E.R. It didn't make sense. The letters were written to Eliza, not by her, but the handwriting looked the same as the one on the deed, as if she had written both, as if she had been writing to herself. That realization sat heavy in my chest. And yet, there was more. Tucked between two of the letters was a folded scrap of paper I hadn't noticed before. On it, in frantic handwriting, "It's under the floor. Don't let it wake." The edges of the note were singed, as if burned in a hurry. I don't know what possessed me, but I went to the hallway right outside the kitchen, the one spot where the floorboards always creaked louder than anywhere else. The wood looked slightly darker there, like it had absorbed something over time. I knelt down, pressing my ear to the surface. For a moment, all I heard was my own heartbeat. Then, faintly, something else. A slow, rhythmic sound. Like breathing, deep and steady, coming from beneath the floor. I jerked back, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The house was silent again, pretending nothing had happened. That's when I realized the truth I didn't want to face. Something in this house was alive, not in the way a person is alive, but in the way an echo is alive, feeding off what remains. That night, I lit every candle I could find. I placed them along the windowsills, the stairs, the kitchen counter. The house glowed in trembling orange light, shadows dancing across the walls like restless memories. At some point, exhaustion won. I fell asleep on the couch, the locket clutched tight in my hand, and then, somewhere between waking and dreaming, I heard her voice for the first time, soft, close, like she was leaning just beside my ear. "Why did you open it?" I woke with a start. Every candle in the house had gone out, every single one, and in the faint silver of moonlight pouring through the window, the mark of the eye was back, not just on the wall this time, on the floor, the ceiling, the door frame. Everywhere I looked, eyes, watching, and in the reflection of the dark window, she was there again. Standing behind me, only this time she wasn't fading. She was smiling. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed, "Don't turn around," but I did, and there she was, clearer now than before. Her skin pale, stretched too tightly across her face, her eyes reflecting the candlelight that no longer burned. Her lips cracked but still smiling. She lifted a trembling finger and pointed toward the floor, right where the sound of breathing had come from. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to, but my legs wouldn't obey. My mind kept looping the same question. Why me? Why now? And then, she spoke again. "You let it see you." The air turned sharp, freezing. The lights flickered violently. The house groaned like something deep within its bones was shifting awake. Then, silence. She was gone. The eyes on the walls were gone. But the mark on the floor wasn't. It had deepened, burned into the wood, smoldering faintly, as if the house itself had inhaled. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I realized the truth. The house wasn't haunted by her. It was haunting her, and now it had found me too. When I look back now, it feels strange, how betrayal never arrives with thunder. It comes quietly, like the slow drip of a faucet you stop hearing until the silence reminds you it's still leaking. For me, that silence came the night I found her name. It started as something small. I was going through our drawer, searching for one of Sam's old tax documents. He'd left early that morning for a work trip. The house was still filled with traces of him, the faint smell of his cologne on our bed, his cup on the counter, his jacket hanging crooked on the chair. I remember smiling then, touching that jacket like it was something living. We weren't perfect, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. But when I opened that drawer, happiness stopped being a feeling. It became a question, because there, tucked beneath a stack of bank envelopes, was a brown envelope with handwriting I didn't recognize. And it was addressed to him. From the county court. My heart skipped. I shouldn't have opened it. I told myself that as my fingers slid beneath the seal. But the part of me that had been uneasy for months, the part that heard his phone calls go silent when I entered the room, took over. Inside, there were papers. Legal papers. I began reading, my breath catching at each line. It wasn't about us. It was about a marriage dissolution between Samuel Collins and a woman named Rebecca Collins, filed, but never finalized. The date made my stomach twist. Filed 2 years before he met me. But the last stamp on the file, the one that mattered, was blank. The case had been dismissed. I remember sitting there for a long time. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. Every tick felt like a heartbeat out of rhythm. When I finally found the strength to move, I opened my laptop and searched. My fingers trembled as I typed her name into the public records database, and there it was, in black and white. Rebecca Ann Collins, marital status, married. Spouse, Samuel David Collins, married. He hadn't divorced her. He was still her husband, and that made me... What the other woman? The lie. The secret second. The world seemed to tilt. I remember standing up too fast, my chair scraping across the floor, my breath catching like I couldn't fill my lungs. Our wedding photos hung on the wall just across from me. I walked to them slowly, each step heavier than the last, the one of us at the altar, his hand on mine, his eyes soft. The one where he laughed when I stumbled on my vows. The one where he kissed my forehead and whispered, "You're my forever." I pressed my fingers against the frame. It was cold. I wanted to tear it down, but I couldn't, because part of me still needed those moments to be real. That evening, I waited. He called around 7, his voice cheerful. "Hey, love. Just checked into the hotel. How's Eli doing?" Our son's name felt different on his tongue now, like a word he borrowed. I tried to sound normal. "We're fine. Just tired." "Good," he said, distracted. "Long day here. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" "Sam," I said before I could stop myself. "Yeah?" I hesitated. My throat burned. "Did you ever finalize your divorce?" There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Then came the practiced calm in his voice. "What? Of course I did. Why would you even ask that?" I swallowed hard. "Because I found the papers. The ones from the court. They say it was dismissed." Another pause. Longer this time. Then his tone shifted, low, sharp. "You went through my things? That's all you have to say?" I whispered. "Not that it's a mistake. Not that it's wrong." He sighed, a sound that carried more annoyance than guilt. "It's complicated, okay? The paperwork, something got messed up. But it's over. I told you that. Legally." Silence. "Sam, look," he said finally. "I didn't want to drag that part of my life into ours. It's just paperwork. You're my wife now, and that's what matters. But it wasn't just paperwork. It was truth. And the truth was, he'd built our life on a lie. I couldn't stop shaking after that call. I remember clutching the edge of the counter, staring at the tiled floor, trying to steady myself. Everything, The years we shared, the house, our son, suddenly felt fragile. Like one strong wind could scatter it all, because how could any of it be real if it began with deceit? The next morning, I didn't tell him I knew more. Instead, I called the courthouse. I gave them his name, her name, the case number. The clerk's voice was calm, routine. Yes, ma'am, the case was dismissed due to non-appearance. No final decree was issued. They are still legally married. Those words. They didn't echo. They buried. I thanked her somehow and hung up. Then I sat on the floor, my back against the kitchen cabinet, and cried. Not the kind of crying that comes with noise or release. The quiet kind, where tears fall without sound and your body feels like it's holding a secret too heavy to carry. That night, after Eli went to sleep, I pulled our wedding album from the shelf. Each page turned like a page of fiction, smiles that weren't honest, vows that weren't true. I could almost hear his voice again from that day. I promised to protect you, to honor you, to be faithful. I whispered the words back into the silence, my voice trembling. You promised what was never yours to give. In the days that followed, I started seeing everything differently. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked about his past. The way his phone always faced down on the table. The way he never wanted me to meet his ex-wife's family, saying, "It's too complicated. She's bitter. It's better if you stay out of it." Now it all made sense. I wasn't supposed to meet her because she wasn't an ex. She was still his wife, and I was the secret. The mistake hidden in plain sight. Still, one question haunted me more than any other. Did she know about me? Because if she did, that meant I wasn't just deceived. I was part of a betrayal that cut both ways. One evening, after putting Eli to bed, I made a decision that would change everything. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed her name into social media. There she was, Rebecca Collins, smiling in a photo with friends, standing outside a little bookstore. Her eyes were gentle, her smile genuine. She didn't look like someone who had spent years in bitterness. She looked at peace. And right there, in the comments of her latest post, my heart stopped. Because beneath a picture of her holding a mug of coffee, someone had written, "Beautiful as always, Mrs. Collins," and she'd replied, "Thank you." Sam took this one. I stared at that comment until the screen blurred. He wasn't just still married to her. He was still with her. It took me 2 full days to gather the courage to confront him, not because I was afraid of his reaction, but because I knew once I asked, there would be no going back. No pretending, no unknowing, no patching over the truth with love. It was late when he came home. The kind of late that smells of another woman's perfume. He entered softly, like a man hoping to slip past the evidence of his own lies. I was sitting in the living room, lights off, the glow of a single lamp stretching shadows across the floor. The laptop sat open in front of me, Rebecca's post still visible. When he saw me, he hesitated. "Hey," he said, his tone cautious. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I didn't answer. I just turned the laptop toward him. His face changed, so quickly, so subtly, that if I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. A flicker of recognition, then denial. "What's this?" he asked. "You tell me," I said quietly. He glanced at the screen, then away. "You're stalking my ex now?" "Your ex?" I repeated. "She calls you her husband. She says you took that picture." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. "You don't understand. It's complicated." "I'm sure it is," I said, "but not complicated enough to hide a wife." His voice hardened. "You're twisting things. She's just having trouble letting go. She posts old photos. She wants to make me look bad." I laughed, a broken, bitter sound I barely recognized as mine. "You mean the same woman you never legally divorced? The one you told me was in your past?" He looked at me then, eyes narrowing. "You've been digging. going through my papers, checking records. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Something inside me snapped. How you feel, I said. You lied to me, Sam. You stood in front of a priest and promised yourself to me while you were still married to her. Do you even know what that makes me? I'm not your wife. I'm your mistake. He stepped closer, his tone softening. Hey, don't say that. You're not a mistake. I love you. But that word, love, sounded rotten now. Like something spoiled under the skin. Then why? I whispered. Why lie? He hesitated. And then, finally, he told the truth. She found out I was seeing someone, he said slowly. She threatened to ruin me. Said she'd tell everyone, take everything. So I told her I'd end it legally. But she refused to sign. It was just easier to walk away. Start over. Start over? I said. By marrying someone else? I didn't think it mattered, he muttered. The marriage was dead. It was just paper. I stared at him, the weight of every word pressing against my chest. It mattered to me, I said. That paper was my life, my name. My son's name, he didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. I stood up, the air around us sharp and heavy. Get out, he blinked. What? I said get out, he scoffed. You're being dramatic. We can fix this. No, I said. You broke it before it even began. He stared at me for a long time, his jaw tight. Then he said quietly, You think leaving me will make things better? You'll be alone with a child, chasing court battles you can't win. Is that what you want? I didn't answer, because deep down I already knew. It wasn't about what I wanted anymore. It was about what I couldn't live with. He left that night. No goodbye. Just the sound of the door closing like a final word. The next morning, I found his wedding ring, his real one, on the bathroom sink. Not the band he wore when we married. The older one, the one with Rebecca's initials engraved inside. I held it in my palm and felt a wave of nausea. All this time, he'd been wearing hers. And suddenly, all the moments that had once seemed tender, his hand brushing mine, his thumb rubbing the edge of that ring when he was nervous. They weren't tenderness. They were memory. Her memory, replayed through me. I called Rebecca that afternoon. I didn't plan it, I just needed to know how much she knew. Her voice was calm, polite, cautious. Hello? Hi, I said. You don't know me, but... My name is Claire Collins. There was a pause. Then slowly she said, Collins? Yes, I whispered. I think we share a husband. The silence that followed was longer than breath. And then softly she said, I was wondering when you'd find out. My throat went dry. You knew? I found your wedding photos online, she said. He told me it was some kind of civil ceremony, that it wasn't real, that you were helping him with business documents. I didn't believe him, not entirely, but I didn't want to face it either. Her voice cracked on the next word. I thought maybe if I pretended, it would all go away. I didn't know what to say. We were both victims of the same man, yet somehow it didn't make the pain easier. It only made it heavier. Do you still live with him? I asked quietly. She sighed. He's been between us, staying some nights here, some there, always with excuses. Business trips, meetings. I used to believe them. I closed my eyes. So that was it. While I was tucking our son into bed, he was probably sipping tea in her kitchen, pretending to be someone's husband again. Thank you for telling me, I whispered. She hesitated, then said something that stayed with me long after we hung up. He lies so easily, Claire. Don't let him talk you into staying. It's like quicksand. The more you fight, the deeper you sink. That night, I packed his things into boxes. Every shirt, every book, every photo. Even the framed picture of our wedding day, I wrapped it in newspaper and sealed it away. Eli asked, Mommy, why are you putting Daddy's stuff in boxes? I smiled through the ache. Because Daddy's going to live somewhere else for a while. Did he do something bad? I hesitated, then said softly, he forgot to tell the truth. He nodded like he understood. the way only children can, with hearts still open and simple. The next day, I went to a lawyer. I remember sitting across from her, explaining everything, how he'd lied, how I'd been unknowingly married to someone else's husband. She listened quietly, then said, "You have the right to annul this marriage. It was never legally valid. You're not bound to him in any way." Her words were meant to comfort, but they broke something inside me. Because for years, I'd built my life around a love that didn't exist in the eyes of the law. And now, in one stroke of a pen, it would all be erased, our vows, our memories, even my name. I left her office, the sun too bright, the city too loud. Everything felt unreal, like walking through someone else's story, and maybe that's exactly what I'd been doing all along. Living inside the lie of a man who couldn't tell where one life ended and another began. But I knew one thing now. That story was over. That night, sleep didn't come, not even for a moment. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp outside. The rain had stopped, but its scent still hung in the air, cold, metallic, and lonely. Daniel was in the bedroom, pretending to sleep. I could hear his slow, deliberate breaths, as if rhythm could disguise guilt. Every few minutes, my mind would whisper a question I didn't want to hear. What now? I looked at the wedding photo on the shelf, the one I used to love. My hair had been pinned up with jasmine, his hand resting on my shoulder. We looked happy, but now even that image seemed foreign, like it belonged to two strangers in someone else's story. The silence was unbearable. I stood, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The night air was damp and heavy. I walked without direction, past the bakery, the little park, the church with the broken bell tower. Everything felt different, as if the world itself was quietly shifting away from me. I ended up at the old pier, the one where Daniel had proposed. The memory came uninvited, vivid and cruel. He had been nervous that day, fumbling with his words, laughing when the ring almost fell into the water. "You're my forever," he had said, looking at me with those soft, convincing eyes. "No secrets, no walls." I laughed bitterly now. "No secrets," I whispered to the wind. The sea answered with a low, restless murmur. I stayed there until dawn. When I finally returned home, Daniel was in the kitchen, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. His face was pale, his eyes swollen, but not from tears. He looked like a man rehearsing his lines. He stood when he saw me. "We need to talk," I nodded. "Yes, we do." He gestured toward the chair across from him. I sat, keeping my arms folded, my gaze steady. "I should have told you," he began. "About her, about everything." "Then why didn't you?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Because I was trying to fix it. I filed for separation years ago, but she never signed. She said she wanted time, but time just stretched. And then you came into my life. You made me feel alive again." "Alive," I repeated, my voice flat. "So you decided to live two lives instead?" He looked down at his hands, ashamed, or maybe just pretending to be. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could manage it, that I could make it right before you ever had to know." "And what about her?" I asked. "Does she know about me?" He hesitated. That was my answer. I stood up. "You married me under false pretenses. You lied to me every single day." He reached for my arm. "Please, just listen. Don't touch me," I snapped, stepping back. My voice echoed through the kitchen. The baby stirred in the next room, a soft whimper that broke through the tension like fragile glass. I froze. He did too. Then I whispered, "You don't get to speak to me about love or life, Daniel. Not when everything you built was a lie." He tried to speak, but I walked past him, into the nursery. Our baby, my baby, was awake, tiny fingers reaching for me. I picked him up and pressed him against my chest. His warmth steadied me, anchored me. In that moment, I realized something sharp and final. I wasn't going to cry anymore. Tears are for people who still believe something can be fixed. I didn't. Not anymore. When I walked back into the living room, Daniel was still standing there, staring at the floor. "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. "I'm going to take back my life." He blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means you can stay here tonight," I said calmly. "But tomorrow morning I want you gone." He looked as if I had struck him. "You're throwing me out?" "No," I said. "You threw yourself out the moment you chose lies over truth." He opened his mouth to argue, but then stopped. Maybe he saw something in my eyes, something unmovable. I didn't wait for his reply. I turned and went upstairs. In our bedroom, the sheets still smelled like him. I stripped them off the bed and tossed them into the laundry basket. Then I opened the closet and started packing. Not his things, mine. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Each item I folded, each shirt, each photograph, each memory felt like pulling a thorn from my skin. It hurt, but it was cleansing. By the time the sun rose, I had 2 bags packed and a plan forming in my mind. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. What I needed was space, to breathe, to think, to rebuild. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done testing me yet. Just as I was zipping the last bag, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Mrs. Carter?" a woman's voice asked. My throat tightened. "Who's calling?" "This is Elaine," she said softly. Daniel's wife. The world tilted. For a moment I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding so loud I thought she could hear it through the phone. Then she continued, her voice trembling. "I think we need to talk." Her voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes from holding yourself together for far too long. "I'm sorry to call you like this," Elaine said, her words slow, deliberate. "But I think we both deserve to know the truth." I said nothing. My breath came shallow, my pulse sharp in my throat. I could hear Daniel moving downstairs, drawers opening, footsteps pacing, the sound of a man trying to tidy up a disaster that couldn't be hidden anymore. "Where did you get my number?" I finally asked. "He left his phone unlocked last night," she said quietly. "You were the last person he called." My hand tightened around the phone. "So you know about me?" "Yes," she whispered. "But I don't know everything. And I need to." There was a pause, the kind that stretches between 2 strangers standing on the same edge of ruin. "Can we meet?" she asked. "In person," I hesitated. Every part of me screamed no. But curiosity, or maybe the need for closure, overpowered everything else. "Where?" I asked. "The coffee shop on Main Street." "In an hour." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, my heart refusing to slow down. Then I looked at the clock. 9:47 a.m. I changed clothes, jeans, a simple sweater, no makeup. I didn't want to look like a woman competing for pity or power. I just wanted to face whatever truth was left. When I came downstairs, Daniel looked up from the table. His eyes were red, his tie still hanging loose. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Out," he frowned. "Now?" "Yes," I said. "There's someone I need to see." He stood. "Is it her?" The question hung heavy between us. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He stepped forward, desperate now. "Please don't. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand," I cut him off, my voice steady. "I understand that you've been living 2 lives, and now both of them are crumbling." "You did that." "Not me." He looked like he wanted to stop me, but he didn't move. Maybe even he knew that no lie could save him anymore. I walked out the door and didn't look back. The coffee shop was nearly empty. The faint smell of espresso and rain lingered in the air. A few students typed on laptops, a couple whispered over pastries. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, And there I was, about to walk into a conversation that would shatter whatever remained of mine. Elaine was already there. She sat by the window, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked tired, not in the way makeup can hide, but in the way pain settles behind the eyes. Her hair was tied back neatly, her clothes plain but careful. When she saw me, she stood slowly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was strange, looking at the woman who existed in the shadows of my marriage. Then she said softly, "You're her." I nodded. "And you're his wife." She gestured to the seat across from her. "Please," I sat. The air between us felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. She took a deep breath. "How long?" I swallowed hard. "Almost 3 years." Her eyes closed briefly, as if absorbing a blow. 3 years, she repeated. "He told me he was working abroad. Said the paperwork for our separation was delayed." I believed him. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. "I thought maybe he'd fallen out of love with me," she continued. "But I never imagined he'd marry someone else." The word marry came out like poison. I wanted to comfort her, but what right did I have? "I was part of the same lie. I didn't know," I said quietly. "Not until last night. I swear if I had—" She looked at me, her gaze steady but hollow. "You loved him," I nodded. "Yes, I did." For a long time, we just sat there, 2 women connected by one man's cowardice. Finally, she reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. "I thought you should see this." Inside were photographs. Daniel, smiling, holding a child I didn't recognize. A girl, maybe 7 years old. His other daughter. My stomach turned. "You have a child," her voice softened. "We have a child." For a second I couldn't breathe. Every piece of me that still clung to denial began to crumble. "He said he didn't have a family," I whispered. "He lies easily," she said. "Always has." She looked out the window for a moment, her reflection faint against the glass. "You know what's funny?" she said, her tone bitterly calm. "When we first met, he told me the same thing he probably told you, that I made him feel alive again, that he wanted to start over." I nodded, numb. She smiled faintly, a tired, broken smile. "He's very good at beginnings, terrible at endings." For the first time since she sat down, her eyes met mine, and in them I saw no hatred, only understanding. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "I don't know yet. Leave, maybe. Start over? For my son." Her expression softened. "He deserves better. We both do." I hesitated, then asked, "And you?" "I'm done," she said simply. "I'll file for divorce myself this time. No waiting, no more hoping." We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful, the quiet that comes after a storm has finally passed. As I stood to leave, she said, "He'll try to talk you out of it. He'll promise change. Don't believe him." "I won't," I said. Our eyes met one last time. 2 women, strangers bound by betrayal, sharing the same fragile strength. When I stepped outside, the rain had started again, soft, cleansing, almost gentle. I tilted my face upward, letting it fall against my skin. It didn't wash the pain away, but it washed the fear. For the first time in months, I felt free, and I knew exactly what came next. By the time I got home that evening, the house no longer felt like mine. Every object seemed to hum with memories that didn't belong to me anymore. The framed photo of our wedding on the mantel. The mug with his initials that I once thought was charming. The coat still hanging by the door he never really left through. Daniel was in the kitchen. He turned when I entered, relief flooding his face like a man who'd been holding his breath all day. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice too careful. "I met her," I said flatly. His jaw tensed. "Who?" I didn't answer. I just set my phone down on the table and looked him in the eye. Elaine, I said. Your wife. The sound of that word, wife, hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She told me everything, I continued. About your daughter. About the lies. About how you never even filed the papers. His shoulders slumped. For a moment, he didn't look like the man who once swept me off my feet. He looked small, cornered. I was going to, he murmured. Things got complicated. Complicated? I repeated, almost laughing. Daniel, you married me while you were still married to her. That's not complicated. That's criminal. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I loved you. I still do. You don't get to use that word anymore, I said, my voice trembling. Not after everything you've destroyed. For a long moment, there was only silence between us, the kind that screams louder than any argument. Finally, I picked up my keys. I'm taking our son to my sister's. Don't call. Don't show up. The police will handle the rest. He looked up sharply. The police? Yes, Daniel, I said, steady now. You committed bigamy. You lied to the court, to me, to her. You don't just walk away from that. His face turned pale. Please don't do this. Think about our son. I am, I said. That's why I'm doing it. 2 days later, the story broke. Not by my choice, but small towns have sharp ears and faster tongues. The clerk at the courthouse must have whispered to someone, and by the end of the week, everyone knew. Did you hear about Daniel? Apparently he had 2 wives. Poor woman, can you imagine? The whispers found their way to every corner of our lives. Neighbors stopped waving. Friends stopped calling. Even the cashier at the grocery store looked at me with quiet pity. I learned quickly that pity can be as cruel as gossip, but I didn't hide. I couldn't afford to. When the police arrived to take Daniel's statement, he tried to talk to me. I stayed behind the door. I didn't owe him my presence anymore. He faced formal charges for bigamy, a word I'd only ever heard in old courtroom dramas. The lawyer said the case could take months, but I didn't care about punishment. I cared about truth. What I didn't expect was the reaction from Elaine. She called me again, her voice gentler this time. Are you okay? I'm managing, I said. I thought you should know, she continued. His company let him go. They said it's bad for their reputation. I closed my eyes. He always cared more about reputation than remorse. She sighed. He's trying to call me. I blocked him. You should too. I already did. For a while, we just breathed on the phone, not as enemies, but as survivors. I don't know if I should feel relieved or guilty, I said softly. Neither, she replied. You should feel free. The first time I stepped outside after the news spread, I half expected people to stare, maybe whisper. But something strange happened instead. An older woman from the bakery stopped me. She put her hand on my arm and said quietly, You're brave. I wanted to tell her I didn't feel brave. I felt broken, exhausted, and hollow, but I nodded, because maybe bravery doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it just looks like surviving the day. That night, I sat by my son's bed watching him sleep. His small hand rested against his cheek, his breathing soft and even. He didn't know the full story yet. I hadn't found the words to tell him. How do you explain to a child that the person who tucked him in every night was living a lie? But I promised myself one thing. He would never grow up thinking deceit was love. I whispered, You'll know what honesty looks like, I swear. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. It's strange how betrayal changes not just how people see you, but how you see the world. A week after the news broke, I went back to work. I thought I could pretend to be normal, at least for a few hours. But the whispers followed me even there. In the break room, someone lowered their voice just a bit too late. That's her, right? The one whose husband had another wife. I poured my coffee slowly, pretending not to hear. But my hands shook just enough for the cup to clink against the counter. When I turned, my manager, kind-eyed, older, met my gaze. He didn't look pitying, just understanding. "Take your time, Anna," he said gently. "No one expects you to pretend." It was a simple sentence, but it loosened something inside me. Pretending was what had broken me in the first place. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the family court. They needed me to attend a hearing, to officially annul my marriage. The word annul sounded so sterile for something that had torn through my life like wildfire. But I showed up anyway, because I wanted that closure stamped in ink. When I walked into the courthouse, I saw Daniel sitting outside the courtroom. He looked thinner, tired, the kind of tired that no sleep could fix. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked. For a fleeting second, I saw the man I once loved, the man who made me believe in new beginnings. But then he looked up, and the illusion vanished. He stood, hesitated, then said, "You look good." I didn't respond. He tried again. "Anna, please, don't let it end like this. We can still what?" I interrupted. "Still pretend you're not married to someone else? Still build a family on lies?" His face crumpled. "I never meant to hurt you." I stared at him for a long time, my voice steady. "You didn't mean not to, either." Before he could answer, the clerk called my name. Inside the courtroom, everything felt quiet, heavy with the sound of paper, pens, and justice. Elaine was there too, sitting across the aisle. Our eyes met for just a second. No anger, no bitterness, just the silent acknowledgement that we were both walking out of the same fire. The judge asked simple questions. "Did you enter this marriage believing the respondent was legally divorced?" "Yes." "Do you have evidence proving otherwise?" "Yes, Your Honor. It took less than 20 minutes to undo 3 years of my life." When the judge signed the papers, I felt an odd mix of grief and relief, like watching a door close on a room that had already burned down. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I didn't expect them. One called out, "Mrs. Bennett, how does it feel knowing your marriage was never real?" I froze. The words hit me like cold rain. Never real. But before I could reply, Elaine stepped forward. Her marriage was real to her, she said, her voice calm but sharp. She lived it honestly. The only thing fake was him, the reporter faltered. The others went silent. I looked at her, stunned. She just gave me a small nod, the kind that says, "You're not alone." We walked away together, side by side, neither of us saying a word. That night, social media lit up. People had recorded the moment outside the courthouse. Her words, my silence. Comments poured in. She handled it with grace. She didn't deserve that. She's stronger than I'd be. I didn't read all of them. I couldn't, but I did see one message that stayed with me. When the truth finally comes out, the quiet ones look the loudest. Maybe that's what this was. Not revenge, not justice, but truth finally standing in the open air. Daniel's family tried reaching out weeks later. His sister left a voicemail, crying, saying she didn't know, that she was sorry. I deleted the message. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. Some things didn't need to be reopened. A month after the hearing, I took my son to the park. The world felt softer that day. Children laughing, leaves rustling, the faint hum of life going on. He pointed at a family nearby, a father pushing his little girl on the swing. "Mom," he said, "will my dad come play with me again?" My chest tightened. "Maybe someday," I said carefully. "But even if he doesn't, you'll always have me." He smiled, simple and sure. "That's enough." And for the first time in months, I realized he was right. It was enough. It was strange, how silence felt different now. For months, the absence of his voice, his footsteps, his laughter echoing from the next room had been unbearable, like a vacuum that swallowed every trace of warmth. But now, that same silence had softened. It no longer clawed at her ribs. It no longer screamed in her ears. Lydia sat by the window of her new apartment, a small sunlit space above a bookstore that always smelled of old pages and fresh ink. Outside, children's voices rose and fell like waves, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, she didn't flinch at their joy. Healing didn't arrive in grand gestures. It crept in quietly, through the smell of morning coffee, through the weight of a good book, through moments when she caught herself smiling without reason. She had stopped checking her phone for messages that would never come. She had stopped replaying that final argument in her mind, the one where everything cracked open. Instead, she had begun collecting fragments of peace, small victories that built upon one another. Getting out of bed on time, watering the plant she once forgot, writing in her journal again. But beneath all this fragile progress, there was something else, a letter she hadn't yet opened. It had arrived 3 weeks after the scandal broke. Sealed in plain white, her name scrawled in handwriting she knew too well. She tucked it away in the back of her drawer, unable to bear the weight of its contents. Every time she thought of it, her heart twisted with a cocktail of dread and longing. That morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, and for reasons she couldn't explain, Lydia reached for it. The paper felt soft and worn at the edges. When she finally unfolded it, she saw only 3 short paragraphs, measured, restrained, written by a man who once spoke in storms. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't defend himself. He only wrote, "I don't expect you to understand why I did what I did. I don't even understand it myself. But if I could undo it, I would. Not for me, but because you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." The next line was harder to read. The ink had bled slightly, as if it had met a tear. "I wanted to change the world. I didn't realize I was becoming the thing I swore to destroy." Lydia's eyes blurred. Her hands trembled as she read the final sentence. "If there's any justice left in what we built, I hope it finds you, not me." For a long moment, she didn't move. The city went on outside her, cars passing, laughter rising, the ordinary rhythm of life untouched by her storm. She folded the letter carefully, then pressed it to her chest. Forgiveness didn't bloom instantly. It wasn't cinematic or sudden. It was slow, like thawing ice, like sunlight returning to a long winter field. She thought of the years they had worked side by side, of the vision they once shared, the ideals that had seemed so pure. Maybe he had lost his way. Maybe they both had. But even now, buried beneath betrayal, she couldn't deny the truth. He had once meant something to her. And that in itself deserved to be mourned, not erased. Later that week, Lydia found herself back at the old office building. It had been sold, stripped, hollowed out. The lobby still smelled faintly of metal and paper, ghosts of late nights and ambition. She walked through the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing softly. At the top floor, where their shared workspace had once buzzed with energy, she paused. The city stretched out before her, golden and endless. It hit her then. How much of her life she had spent looking upward, chasing, proving, building. And how much she had forgotten to simply be. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, not for him, not even for justice, but for clarity. For release. When she opened her eyes again, the world looked different, brighter, lighter. Before leaving, she placed the letter on the old desk and left it there, beneath the sunlight streaming in through cracked blinds. It was no longer hers to carry. That night, Lydia returned home to her quiet apartment and wrote something in her journal for the first time in months. "I survived the fire. But maybe the fire was never meant to destroy me. Maybe it was meant to reveal who I really am." She didn't know what the future held, whether she'd rebuild her career, whether the world would ever see her the same way again. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't need the answers. She had learned to live in the questions, and that, she realized, was its own kind of peace. Spring came quietly that year. No sudden bursts of color or wild storms of renewal, just a gradual softening of the air, the smell of rain on concrete, and a light that lingered longer in the evenings. Lydia didn't notice it at first, but her reflection had changed, not in the obvious ways, not in the way her hair framed her face or how the faint lines at the corners of her eyes had deepened, but in the steadiness behind her gaze. There was a gentleness there now, where once there had only been vigilance. Her days followed a rhythm she'd built with care. Mornings started with quiet walks to the corner cafe, a place that had become her refuge. The barista, a young man with kind eyes, always greeted her with the same line, "Rough day ahead or peaceful one?" And every time she smiled, answering, still deciding. It had become their little ritual. In those moments, Lydia realized how healing often hides inside the ordinary. The way sunlight falls across a table, the smell of bread baking somewhere nearby, the sound of someone humming to themselves. These small fragments stitched her back together in ways grand gestures never could. Still, there were nights when the ghosts returned, faint, uninvited, persistent. Regrets that whispered through the quiet, asking what if and why not. But instead of running from them, she'd learned to sit with them, to listen, to let them speak and fade without giving them the power to stay. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the city breathe below her, she received an email. It was from an old journalist friend, someone who had once interviewed both her and him when their names carried weight. The subject line read, "Follow-up story, would you like to comment?" Her chest tightened for a moment. She opened it slowly. The message was brief. A new piece was being written about the entire ordeal. But this time, the tone was different. It wasn't about blame or scandal. It was about aftermath, how people rebuild after their worlds collapse. The journalist asked if Lydia would like to share her side 1 year later. She stared at the screen for a long time. The old Lydia would have seen it as a chance to correct the record, to clear her name, to reclaim her dignity before the world. But the woman sitting here now understood something deeper, that truth didn't need an audience to be real. She drafted a reply anyway. "Thank you for reaching out. But no, I don't need to comment. Some stories find peace in silence." When she hit send, a calm she hadn't known before filled her chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't defiance. It was freedom. Days later, she visited a nearby gallery hosting an exhibit called Reconstruction. Each piece was made from broken objects, shattered glass molded into waves, burnt wood turned into sculpture, scraps of old fabric woven into new shapes. She stood before one installation, a cracked mirror framed by rusted metal, with the words etched beneath it. "You can't erase the breaking, but you can shape what remains." Lydia felt her throat tighten. Something inside her shifted, like a door unlocking. The artist had captured in metal and glass what she had been trying to express in words. That pain wasn't something to escape, but something to transform. That evening, back home, she picked up her journal again. This time, the words came easily. "Healing isn't the absence of pain," she wrote. "It's learning how to carry it without breaking beneath it." As the days turned into weeks, she began reconnecting with people she'd once avoided. Friends who had watched her fall from grace, unsure how to reach out. She met them for quiet lunches, shared honest laughter, and talked not about the scandal, but about life, its absurdities, its beauty, its unpredictability. They never asked about him. She never volunteered it. Some things no longer needed to be spoken. Months later, on a late summer afternoon, Lydia visited her father's grave, something she hadn't done since before the chaos began. The cemetery was quiet, overgrown in places, the grass swaying softly in the wind. She knelt, placed a small white flower on the stone, and whispered, "I'm okay now." For a moment, she swore she felt the air shift, as if the world had been holding its breath for her all along, waiting for this simple truth. As she stood and turned to leave, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was an invitation from the publishing house she'd once worked with. They were launching a new initiative, a mentorship program for young writers. They wanted her to lead it. Lydia smiled, not the triumphant smile of victory, but the quiet one of a person who had finally come home to herself. When she accepted, she didn't see it as a return to her old world. It wasn't about reclaiming a throne or rewriting a legacy. It was about something humbler, something purer, building once again, but this time on honest ground. In the months that followed, her life took on a quiet steadiness. She taught her students not just about writing, but about truth, the kind that survives even when reputations don't. And every so often, she'd catch herself thinking of him, not with anger, not with sorrow, just with understanding. Some people are lessons, not lifetimes. One night, as rain began to fall softly against her window, she whispered a simple prayer. May he find peace too. Then she closed her eyes, listening to the sound of rain against glass, gentle, rhythmic, eternal. The city slept. The past was quiet. And for the first time, Lydia's heart was light. Sometimes when people ask Lydia how she managed to survive it all, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the silence that followed, she smiles faintly and says, "I didn't survive it. I outgrew it." There's a difference. Survival is about clinging to the wreckage. Growth is about learning to build again, with steadier hands, clearer eyes, and a quieter soul. In the end, Lydia's story isn't just about deceit or loss. It's about the unglamorous, unseen work of healing, the kind that doesn't fit neatly into headlines or viral posts. It's the story of countless people who have been broken in private but learned to rebuild without applause, because healing rarely looks heroic. Sometimes it's just showing up, brushing your hair, making your coffee, stepping outside when every part of you wants to stay hidden. Lydia's story reminds us that closure isn't something you wait for someone else to give you. It's something you create, moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. And if you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or made to question your worth, maybe her story whispers to you too. You don't have to be who you were before the pain. You can be someone softer, wiser, and still whole. There are nights when Lydia still wakes up to the faint echo of her old life, a voice that sounds like his, a memory of laughter in the kitchen, the warmth that once felt safe. But then she breathes and remembers that not all comfort is love, and not all love is honest. The world will tell you to forgive quickly, to move on as if betrayal were just another chapter. But healing isn't about speed. It's about truth, about sitting with the ache long enough to understand it, so it no longer defines you. Lydia's story isn't tragic anymore. It's honest. And honesty, even when it shatters you, is a kind of freedom. She doesn't hate him now. She simply doesn't carry him. And in that letting go, she finally understands. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the acceptance that you've lived through it and still have the courage to love life again. So if you're listening tonight and you've ever been lied to, broken, or made to feel invisible, let Lydia's story remind you, you are not someone's secret. You are not someone's mistake. You are someone's lesson and your own rebirth. Would you have done what she did or walked away sooner? Tell me in the comments, and remember, you're not alone.